Difficult business decisions are a fact of life, and probably one of the hardest parts is how they can impact your employees. But is there any way to engage them in the difficult decision, either before or during, to try to soften the blow and make it get more buy-in and all the things that you would like? And my guest today says the answer is yes, and she's going to describe it and give you a way to get started on that. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of PracticeCare. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they want, but let's face it, care is better when it's just you and your provider sitting at the table trying to figure out what's best for you. And no one else is secretly whispering in their ear what their agenda is, whether it's a hospital, a health system, owners in faraway lands, whoever it might be. Eventually, if that's the situation you're in, it's going to start happening to you. And that puts you in a difficult position in that moment. And I'd rather those moments never happen. And my guest today is Megan Shull. Megan is a bilingual speech language pathologist and owner of Building Bridges Through Communication, a small multidisciplinary home health agency primarily serving adults with developmental and congenital disabilities. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication Sciences and Disorders from Baylor University and a Master of Science in Communication Disorders from the University of Texas at Dallas. With over 15 years of experience in speech pathology and nearly a decade in private practice management, Megan has established herself as an expert in her field and as an innovator within the healthcare community. And Megan, thank you for coming on PracticeCare.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I find myself saying this to an increasing number of guests, which is you seem to have picked one difficult little corner of the healthcare world where you serve. So, just tell us a bit more about you. Why that niche? Tell us a bit about Building Bridges, your practice, kind of help us get to know you a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really think I always wanted to go into private practice. And I was working as a program director for a pediatric home health company. And I had a coworker who had a son who was an adult with cerebral palsy, and he needed a new augmentative communication device. And that happened to be a niche for me as well.
Okay.
And she just said, hey, I can't find anyone to work with him. Would you mind helping? And I said, sure, no problem. I had spent most of my career working with kids. So this would be a nice change of pace. Let's see what's going on. And not only did I love it, it really provoked in me this passion to help transition our clients from pediatric into the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah.
It really revealed itself that there's a great gap in service provision. There's pediatric, it has a name. Geriatric, it has a name.
It's true.
And there's this entire span of their adult lives, which really can be the most meaningful for most people. And there's not a name for it. There's no specialty. And so that really became something I don't know, I was very passionate about it. And so I said, you know what, let's build a bridge. Let's bridge the gap in care. And so we became Building Bridges, and it really was just me, and has kind of grown organically. We really started out, it was Building Bridges Through Communication, really because my initial vision was just me as a speech therapist working with this population in this community. And now we've grown to 5 different disciplines, covering 6 different counties across North Texas, 34 employees strong. And so, we just our mission really just continues to be bridging the perceived gaps in care that we encounter.
Yeah, it's funny. Now I understand the name. It's funny that the gap, if you look at the gap in like age years, the majority of anybody's life is the gap you describe.
Right.
It's
as adults.
It's a very long bridge. Yes. But I never thought about it that way before, but you're absolutely right. So 6 disciplines, 30, how many employees? 30 something
34.
Employees? 34 employees. So you've got a real serious, not that anybody else is unserious, but a real, sizable operation. And we're talking about engaging employees, particularly with difficult decisions. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
My personality is someone who's pretty transparent, who's pretty direct. I'm not much, competition in healthcare doesn't need to be competition like it's seen in the other marketplaces. Competition can be collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really buy into secrecy or there needing to be any kind of, there's so many decisions to make and they're all
Mm-hmm.
so hard. Why do I want to own the entirety of that problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, for me, being a transparent personality and pretty relatively direct in my communication style, it really organically became something that was a focus for me,
Mm-hmm.
and a very important part of my practice. And how do I engage my employees, and what's the real benefit of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the ROI? What's the return on
Right.
investment of engaging them? And it really looks like retention, increased employee satisfaction,
Yeah.
which, as we all know, is a huge issue for really employers in general, but certainly small employers, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how do we really compete
Yeah.
for the best of the best as employers.
Yeah. Which, yes, COVID and post-COVID has brought that to a fine point. But yeah, I mean, even pre-COVID, when the labor market was sort of at full employment plus, it could have been terribly easy to find somebody if they left. So the rationale is to, keep people, is to make sure, right? And you do that through
Keep
engagement.
people and keep them happy. And, I mean, in general, right?
Mhm.
I do better when I feel better. It's pretty simple,
Yeah.
right? And what I have found over the years is that the higher that my employees are engaged with us as an agency, the more ownership that they feel and the more
Mhm.
partnership that they feel, the better quality of care that my clients receive.
Yeah.
Their level of investment really elevates and rises, and that has direct impacts to almost everything I can measure.
Yeah. And and you're not the first one to come on here and talk about it, but the idea of it's a default to say we must take care of our patients. And yes, of course, you should, but the mechanism to do that is if the people on your team who interact with them are really happy and engaged and satisfied, well, then wouldn't it stand to reason that the patient care would get that much better? So you
Certainly,
know,
it's a very symbiotic relationship between the two.
exactly. Yeah. So what is your way of engaging employees? Or do you have one way that stands out for you?
Um, I think honesty,
Hmm.
transparency, genuine conversations, being intentional about having those conversations,
Hmm.
as an administrator, as an owner, it is really tempting and very easy to get caught up in the white noise.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
sometimes it's a lot faster to, check a task off or mark
Hmm.
something off the list by just making the decision by what you think, right?
Right.
But we live in the United States, a country built on democracy. Everybody wants to be heard,
Hmm.
right? Everyone has something valuable to say. I mean, that's kind of the premise of what we do as speech pathologists, right? We put value in communication and understanding people's thoughts, wants, and feelings. And so it's really important for me to be intentional weekly, daily, creating both structured, unstructured, natural, organic to very intentional, formal types of opportunities for my staff to share with me or for me to share with them, right?
Hmm.
It's really thinking about the communication as a two-way partnership.
Okay. I want to take a pause for a second, just to ask you kind of, were you going to talk about, we talked about surveys and how you do
Yeah.
survey. Yeah. Was that coming? Sorry.
Yes. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. Um there
Because
you
we can go
go.
back and do it again.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I
Mhm.
asked you that question again?
No, I don't. I don't. I feel like I'm kind of like I'm very tangential as a communicator, by the way, like this.
Okay.
So that's pretty normal. Yes, ask me the question again,
Okay,
please.
let's go back and I'll ask you. So, how do you engage? Are there particular different ways that you engage
I understand
employees?
what you're asking me now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. pause and we'll take this out afterwards. All right, let's go back. Okay. So Megan, let's jump into it and talk about, how you engage employees. Is there, any particular ways that you find that you think maybe are different than what we hear about sort of popular ways of engaging employees?
Yeah, sure. So, in addition to the traditional ways, the scheduled calls, the organic and natural type conversations that come up, we also do pretty regular and routine surveys of our staff.
Okay.
We do them annually as, something that is a part of just our annual planning procedure at the end of a calendar year. But then we also do them kind of topic based as things start arising through these natural and organic conversations that we're having as being potential needs. For example, recently, benefits and healthcare for small businesses. Man, that's a big topic. It's a tough topic.
Difficult decisions. Yeah, difficult decisions loom.
Right.
It's a
super
great
difficult.
example.
And there's not a clear lighthouse guiding you as to how to do it and what to do and what's the right thing. And there's a lot of confusion, and so for us, that was something there was a lot of buzz, right? Every conversation as I was talking to staff, it just was coming up a lot. And, it was something as an owner, I had this kind of concept that like, well, we're a small business. We can't do that. Right. And per my personality, and I don't really do can't very well. So I thought, well, I mean, is that true? Can we not do that? Is that true? Do they really want that? Right. And so, that was an example of a recent topic that came up that we did a specific survey on. To really get a pulse on what was needed. And to be honest with you, the results were not completely congruent with the perception that I had.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So for example, I really thought that healthcare, like medical benefits, were what was most important to my therapist. Okay. Right. But out of the 22 of our 34 employees that qualified, really only 6 was medical something that they were looking for. In fact, what my staff really needed access to were ancillary benefits, right? Short-term disability, long-term disability, critical illness. And it does make sense when I think about it. We're employed, we are mostly women, right? The primary demographic that we have is somewhere in between 24 and 30. So you think about short-term disability being something that's potentially highly important to them, but not necessarily what your off the cuff thought of the direction you needed to go would be. Okay.
And so as a result, then did you sort of tailored the package offering to your employees to meet what they were looking for?
Right, exactly. And, tailored the resources that we were going to, any small business has a finite amount of resources, right? Especially when you're a business or a practice like ours that is all one small area of practice, right? Larger practices have margins to be pulling from different types of departments, and we don't really have that, right? So it really does make every decision that we make critical, right? It's a life altering potential decision, and our resources are finite. And so by doing this survey and really honing in on exactly what benefit that they were needing as a group and what they were most interested in, what I did was I used my resources as an administrator my time, which is incredibly, that's a big value because it's also finite. We were able to cost share in that, whereas if we were doing something broader, right, more expansive, that might not have been a possibility. We were able to really make sure that we were offering something that was going to meet their needs. right? And that's important.
Yeah. And then, so now they're out talking with friends and how's the benefits there? Typically the answer is, well, we don't have any or they're fine. But your people can say, well, they asked us what we wanted and they kind of tailored it. Like, who does that? Wow,
Right.
what a great impression.
Right. And I think, the one piece of feedback that I've gotten as we've done these surveys, right? And as we've really kind of honed the craft of surveying to engage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the one piece of feedback that I've gotten that's been most meaningful to me, right, is
Mm-hmm.
that I had a very tenured therapist, and she said to me, I've had employee surveys my entire career, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've never actually known what the results were
Mm.
and seen anything done with those results. So I think, it is important to survey. It's important to be intentional about the questions that you're asking and really diving into and doing the pre-survey research to know what you need to ask. But it's
Mm-hmm.
also important to share the information and to share the actionable takeaways
Yeah.
from the information you gathered. And I think that is the piece that really helps people feel
Yeah.
engaged, that helps them feel invested and not ingenuinely or superficially, right? It is genuine.
Yeah. It's such a good point. I mean, just think about our own personal lives. Somebody asks your opinion or they ask you for advice and then they don't take it. Right. And so, of course, they were under no obligation to. But after a while, you start to say to yourself, I wonder why they keep asking. They never do anything with it. So it sounds like maybe one of the lessons is if you're going to go down the path of asking employees about something that's really, don't ask unless you're willing to share the results and do something about it.
Right,
You know?
correct. And or if you can't, I mean, there have been situations where we've done a survey and the answer was we really can't do anything about this right now. Here's why.
Yeah. Here's
And
why.
here's what we can, if this is something that continues to be a great need for
Mm-hmm.
us as an agency or a great need for us, the general consensus of our staff, then
Mm-hmm.
here are the steps that we need to take to be in a
Mm-hmm.
position to do something about it, right? I've
Yeah.
had those kinds of conversations as well.
Yeah. I can picture some people out there wondering, I don't want to, if I ask them about, let's say, health benefits, because we're on that, um, I, I don't want them to think there's a problem. So I want to ask, I'll just try to solve it myself, or we'll just kind of let it slide. Like, what would be your response to that?
My response would be that you will expend a lot of energy trying to solve a problem that you may or may not have,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
That type of controlling
Yeah.
type of mentality of kind of let me control, the reality of owning a small business is you will never control all of the X factors.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never control all of the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And about your first 5 years you'll spend trying and
Right.
drive yourself crazy and lose a
Yeah.
lot of sleep and a lot of emotional health. And it's not until you reach this level of peace with understanding that you can't control all the X factors
Mm-hmm.
that you go, gosh, I need to engage everyone. We're a team,
Mm-hmm.
right? We will be stronger together and holding hands together. And
Mm-hmm.
I am going to better support them by reserving my resources for those problems, I
Mm-hmm.
guess you might say, or those decisions that really need my investment,
Yeah.
right? And that's what your staff need from you.
Yeah.
But you can't do that unless you really are willing to be open to
Yeah.
what all of the things that need your attention are.
Yeah.
And how will you know unless you ask?
Yeah. And I guess if you've decided, well, we have to do X, um, I could do X smartly or not so smartly. And if it's impacting my employees, maybe it sounds naive, but what's the harm in asking as long as you get what you're needing? Um, so a question of like, say best practices of surveying, kind of a nuts and bolts question. You mentioned one thing, which
Mhm.
is, ask around first. You go to write a questionnaire, which is what a survey is. And the questions need to be, you can't just willy-nilly it, right? I mean, you've got to
Right.
gather the answers you need, make sure that you're asking the questions that are relevant, but you shouldn't just sit down. So one of them is do a little research to find out what you should be asking about. which is classic kind of market research technique. And so that's one. But what have you found? Like, what are some other kind of nuts and boltsy kind of, make sure you keep in mind best practices if you're going to survey your employees?
Right. I mean, just like you said, right? There is this pre-research type of effort. I mean, any good survey that I put together takes a good month of pre-research and then actually like writing the questions and coming up with a rubric. I think your scale for how you ask for answers is extremely important, right? Being very intentional about the options that you're giving for response, right? Or if you want it open-ended, right? You really have to think through, just play the tape out, really. Write the survey out, answer it yourself, or send it to one person and see if the information that you get back is what you're hoping for. And if it's not, don't send it out to everyone. That's not going to be super fruitful. So I definitely have found making sure that you know what you're asking, what information that you're wanting. Thinking about, are you wanting to do multiple choice questions? Are you wanting to do a rating scale? I personally tend to do 3-point rating scales. Any more than that puts, the 4 and the 5 bucket. Man, okay, what does that really mean? Right? Right. So I tend to do basically a 3-point scale because really, someone's either super happy, they're okay, or they're really unhappy. Right. That's what you need to know. And if you have an overwhelming majority of really unhappy, then bingo, bango, that's where you need to exert your efforts. Right. I'm also really intentional about the semantics of open-ended questions. Right. So what I mean by that is, every survey, you always want to ask a strengths and weaknesses type of question when you do like an end of year survey, right? It gives you the most valuable information, and it's very telling, but I'm always intentional to ask the tell me what's going well question first, right? I want to know that information first.
So if you're only positive at one point in the year, it's going to be right now.
That's right. It's got to be right now. And it helps me, as I'm going through and reading the results, right? It helps me be able to process the information that might not be so fun for me to process, right? So, it's a little tidbit for me. And then, when I ask about weaknesses, really, I phrase it as areas of growth, right? How are we going to grow together in our next year? Super intentional about using we, and that's not just in surveys. That's all year long, because I think from my own perspective, it continues to remind me all the time that we are a unit and we are a team, and that this really isn't an I business. But I also I think it provides them, when I'm asking in a survey, it really provides a sense that I want to share ownership with them. Right. Which is going to increase that engagement and investment.
Right. Which sounds very consistent from how you kind of show up every day anyway. So it's the consistency also. Yeah, you mentioned something earlier. It sounds totally kind of wonky, but it's true. Make sure the question that you write is really what you mean to say and ask. Something that we used to, prior life in corporate, we'd write up surveys, or we would take the surveys that an outside agency would do, and we'd send them to 4 or 5 different people and say, just answer the question as you understand it. And we'd look at their answers. And sometimes one question, we get 4 or 5 different answers. We're like, yeah, it's not there yet. But better to do that before you send it out live than because then you get the answers back and like, oh, I screwed up and I can't use the answers to that question. And since you want a survey to be short, every question ought to matter. And so, yeah, it's really easy to do. Just don't bias them. I want you to answer this question as you understand it. And then you see what you get. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other geeky thing is, you said, a 3-point scale. The message there is that it's an odd number, and people will disagree with this, but that's why there's a 5-point or a 7-point. But with an odd, there could be a neutral. I'm super happy, I'm super unhappy, or I'm meh. And the reason I think you want that there is because meh is a legitimate feeling. But when you have an even scale, People don't like, oh, we want to force them to tell us if they're happy or unhappy because we can't do anything with meh. Well, you can, and since it's a legit feeling, you got to anyway. This is I anytime I do a survey and I see an even number, I get annoyed because
Well,
it doesn't
right.
capture the full spectrum, right? And
Right. It doesn't. It
you know,
doesn't. And it's,
and
I
three's
think,
nice because then it's practical for you. You
right.
know,
And I think the other thing too is like, don't you think that kind of lends itself to our societal feeling in general, right? Where
Mhm.
we either our emotions have to be at an extreme,
Well, it's so
really happy or
self-serving.
really sad,
Yeah, it's
you
like the
know?
survey's written for the company sending it rather than trying to figure out what's on
But
my
it's
mind.
okay to be just content with something,
It
right?
is. It is.
And the reality is that anytime you um, put out a survey, or anytime that I put out a survey, you know, I'm going to get back results that help me prioritize
Mm-hmm.
the decisions that I'm making and how I'm spending the resources of an administrator. A small business, that's one of, and especially in healthcare with your margins so thin,
Mm-hmm.
everything is just as tight as it can be. Your administrative support, or what some people would refer to as non-revenue generating support,
Right.
it has to be iced in,
So
which
warm,
means,
such a warm term.
right? But I mean, it has to be iced in for your practice to work. That's just
Mm-hmm.
a practical reality. But what does that mean? Well, then that means that I have to be extra smart
Mm-hmm.
with how I spend that resource. And so when I do these surveys, what it's helping me do is prioritize how, as an administration, we are going to utilize ourselves and support our team,
Yep.
get the most bang for your buck, and help them with where they're needing the most help.
Right. Right. It makes a ton of sense. Any mistakes you've made along the way in surveying, whether it's the questionnaire or kind of something bigger behind it that you say, don't do what I did. Here's an example for those who are listening.
A ton, yes, a lot of mistakes. I think asking too many open-ended questions.
Okay.
That was a big mistake. And I think primarily because what you were referring to earlier, right? Everyone reads a question from their own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you get a very wide variety of interpretations to a question. I mean, a great example is one year, I ask about benefits. And for me, benefits has always meant
Oh, interesting.
healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Like healthcare, medical, dental, vision, right? And man, I mean,
Free
I got
lunch,
about, yeah,
massage.
I
Yeah.
mean, it
Interesting.
was
Yeah.
kind of all over the map. And I was like, oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Um, so, asking too many open-ended questions. I think for me, right, and using a larger scale
Mm-hmm.
really diluted the potency of the
Mm-hmm.
results that I got and made it a lot harder for me to take,
Yeah.
you know, distinct actionable items
Right.
you know, swiftly after I got the results. I think in the beginning, trying to control the narrative of the survey was a
Interesting. What do
big
you mean?
mistake that I made. Um, Being a little scared of the results,
Mm.
being that a question might provoke um, unhappiness or unrest
Yeah,
in my
that's
staff.
a much better. That's what I was trying to get to earlier. I didn't do a good job of
Yeah,
it, but
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I was really scared of
Why are
that.
they asking about this? What's going to
Yeah,
change? What's going to, yeah.
really scared of that in the beginning, or even to the point of like when I started asking about benefits and healthcare long before we were in a position to really do anything at all about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
um I was afraid that it was going to prompt them to go, yeah, you know what, I could get that somewhere else, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so I was extremely sensitive to what questions I would ask. And you really, you don't know what you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't know if you don't ask,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
um and what I found is when I really just put that all aside, and when I really tried to put on my lens of me as the employee
Mm-hmm.
versus the employer, and what I would want to be asked and how I would read it, and just ask the questions. What I really found was that it built a level of trust
Mm-hmm.
in my staff,
Yeah.
right? it didn't really do these scary things I thought it was going to do. Instead, it created this rapport, this trust, this bond, this partnership, right? Because they could see, which is genuine, right? This isn't a put on for me. This is an everyday, but they could see and feel that I really wanted to know. And all really, I think most people want is to know that you're trying.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to be heard. And yeah, it's like it's a basic human instinct. It's true. Yeah. All those worries, right? I mean, when I started out, it's funny, like I'm batting 1,000 on the number of worries I had, but none of them actually ever materialized at all. They were just swirling around in my head,
right.
from nothing. Not to say that every worry doesn't, but it just seems like the ratio of worries you have versus those that turn out to be true is, just crazy in your favor. So, not willy-nilly give it a shot, but let Megan's experience kind of give you a second try on this. Do you kind of govern, do you think you can over survey? And I'm just, because people could go off the deep end in the other direction and just survey for everything. But there is, do you kind of say to yourself, we want to give ourselves 2 or 3 a year or whatever it is and make them count and pick, or do you just, do you have any kind of rule
I
on
mean, I
that?
think it depends on how you're defining survey. I mean, from a formal, let me send this out and let me look at the results. I mean, absolutely. You can definitely overdo that because on your end, you've got to come up with it. And like I said, putting one together, a good one takes me 3 or 4 hours after I've done the lots of pre-research, right?
Yeah.
So certainly, and then you've got to take the results, interpret it, share it with people, do something with it, right? Like it's a multi-stage process. So if you're talking about the real formal surveys that we do, yes, you can definitely overdo those. I would do, I personally do one in like Q4 of the year, right?
Okay.
To help me because we always do at the beginning of the next year, kind of a kickoff meeting, right? Setting our vision for the year. What are we going to do this year? Right. And so that Q4 survey helps me really set those goals and make some actionable measurements for that year. Right. And then we might do one additional one during the year.
Okay.
If the need arises.
Right. Something difficult's coming down the pike, or you think it might.
Exactly.
Got
exactly.
Got it.
But, if you're considering surveying, for me, surveying goes beyond just that one official form that I sent out.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of like just asking for feedback informally, having conversations,
Sure.
opening those lines of communication all year long.
Sure.
And no, I don't think you can overdo that.
Yes. Good distinction. I was thinking of the specific kind of, all right, let's write something up, send it out, tabulate it, do that process. Okay, cool. This has been in my opinion, a great introduction to this topic. We've never had this on before. We've had a lot of guests come on and talking about engaging employees. What can you do? But this is an additional take on it, I'll say. So I appreciate you sharing what you do and to an extent how you do it. Before we let you go, a couple of questions I ask every guest. The first one is there anything you think I should have asked you that on this topic you think listeners should know about, but I just didn't ask you?
No, I really think we, covered everything. It's just, keeping in mind that engaging your employees is an ongoing process, but, it has to be formal and informal, right? Because without the formal, you really can't tabulate or measure or be black and white about what you're doing and what you've done.
Right. Absolutely. And then the other question I ask is, so, hopefully we've caught somebody's attention who wants to start down this path on the survey side. What are 1 or 2 tangible, easy to implement steps you'd recommend that they start with to get going on it?
I would probably, the first thing I would do is block out an hour of my time.
Okay.
And sit down and really think about what do I feel like the largest or most difficult decisions facing my practice are right now, right? Really think through that, really play out the tape, really, put some time and brainstorming into because that's going to help you understand. And that's part of that pre-research, right? Help you understand what it is you're needing to know, right? And that will be the first thing that you need to do to get ready. And I think then the second thing is probably that second phase of the pre-research process, and picking, one or two of your targets, whether it's, depending on what your practice looks like, your practice makeup. Like for me, anytime something comes to my mind that's like, ooh, this is going to be a tough business decision that we're about to make, or something that we're going to need to hurdle as a practice, I first always start and spend some time really thinking about that, and kind of defining what I perceive to be the problem, right? And then I usually try to pick at least 3 types of employees that I have, right? So someone from my administrative team, someone from my therapy team that's full-time, someone from my therapy team that's part-time.
Okay.
Right? Because they're all going to have different perspectives. And so I usually then, after I have my own perception of what the next hurdle that we're facing is, I usually then reach out to those 3 people and just have an informal 30-minute call with them and kind of walk through it with them. And that generally shapes up exactly what I'm needing to survey about, right? And the questions that I'm needing to ask, or it eliminates it as a problem altogether. I've done that before. Sometimes I do that, and what I find is, oh, that
I'm
really
the only
isn't a
one who
problem.
thinks this is an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the only
head.
one. So, never mind. We're all good. Let's go eat cake.
Yeah, sample size of one.
So yeah, that would be the first 2 things I would do.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. And Megan, thank you again for sharing your experience of this on PracticeCare. I hope and I know that it's going to help many of our listeners out. Once again, Megan Shull is with Building Bridges Through Communication in the North Texas area. We're going to put your contact information in the show notes that you supplied to us, so that if anybody wants to contact you, they'll be able to do so. A couple of other points before we wrap up. If you're someone like Megan, you own a private practice and you've got an experience, some way that you do something that you think would benefit if others heard about, we want you to come on PracticeCare as soon as possible. In the show notes for Megan's episode and all episodes, there's a link. It's just a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to PracticeCare on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks very much. And until next time.